Hi, this is Harold Long. Welcome to the Hill-Tran United weekly message and podcast. I'm glad you're making time for this week's teaching. I will have more to say at the end, but for now, let's dive right in. Well, hello. Chiefs Nation, yes, good. It's great to be here. My name is Pastor Harold Long. I am the teaching pastor here for Transformation, and it's great to be with you this morning. I'm glad you're here. I hope you braved the cold elements. Just a couple prayer requests before we go into our time today. Pastor T, who pastors Hillside Church here, has been pretty ill for the last week or so, and didn't know was in the hospital and didn't really know what was going on with her. Got a false diagnosis of some long, drawn-out, big scientific word, but it ended up being a false test. It wasn't COVID. And they think that it's because of a bad reaction to one of the medications she was on. So she sent me an email yesterday that said that she's starting to have some relief from that. So let's be praying for her. That's a challenging time for sure whenever we go into that kind of thing. And then I just want to ask you to pray for the new virtual children's ministry that launched this morning. It launched at 10:30. I don't know what kind of participation we had on it or didn't have on it, but I know we had some eager teachers on there that were willing to do that. We put it out there pretty heavy for a while, so hopefully we had some traction with that. And I'm going to encourage you to invite others to do that. That will continue on. Even once everybody gets back to normal, we'll continue that on, trying to reach an audience and a demographic that we're just not reaching in the physical realm. So just be praying for that ministry. That virtual online ministry happens every Sunday at 10:30 for a half hour. And if you have kids between pre-K and fifth grade, I encourage them to get on there and check it out. I think you'll find it to be very rewarding. This is a Super Bowl worship service, if you might want to have it. If you haven't figured that out yet, in the last several months I've been here, you know that I love Jesus, I love my family, I love the Chiefs, I love the Cardinals, I love the Blues, I love to play golf. I'm a sports man. I love it. But I'm a Jesus freak too, so I'm all those things. So today's a fun day. It'll be a good time. The title of our message today is "How Did We Get Here?" And so it's a great question to ask: is how did we get here? And we're now in our third week of our message series, "The Language of God: Understanding Our Creator in Science." And the last two messages are online. So if you haven't missed those for whatever reason, you can go back and watch the entire service, or you can simply just listen to the message itself. But I encourage you to follow through with it, because it'll really help make sense of this as we go through this message series, because one builds on the other. And Dr. Collins' arguments and how he wrote this book and how it progresses. So I encourage you to lean into that in a powerful way. This message series begs to repeat because of the vast amount of insight and research that went into tackling life's big questions. And so Dr. Collins does a really great job of trying to bring both science and faith, belief, together and help you understand it. And why is that a big deal? I think it's a huge deal because all people have the big questions in life. Every human being on this planet. Why am I here? What am I supposed to do? What's my purpose in life? What happens to me when I die? We all have those questions. How did the earth get here? How did God get here? How old are we? I mean, these are all questions that every single person wrestles with at some stage of their life. And they affect your faith. They affect how deep you lean into your calling, your kingdom calling. So that's why it's really, really important. And that's why we did a separate session outside of the message series, which is just a one-on-one with Dr. Jason Van Houten from HUMC. He's a member there, but he's a doctor in education, but he teaches science. So him and I sit down for about 45 minutes, and we just go over this book, this message series, and some of your questions, if you bring them in or email them to us or text us questions you'd like us to wrestle with. But we just shot session 2 of that yesterday, which will air later today. And I encourage you to check those out because we get in depth, and this is from a science background, and so he can lean on that and with some validity and help us make sense of this. But we all have these questions, friends. Your kids coming up behind you, your grandkids, all have these big questions, and they're easy not to talk about. But I'm telling you, if you avoid them, the world's going to press them on these questions, and if they're not grounded in their faith, it's easy to wad up your faith and throw it away. I mean, it happened to me the first time I ever heard of evolution. I mean, I literally just wadded up my faith and tossed it in the trash. They sliced me like a fish, filleted me like a fish. I had no response to it. And it just destroyed everything that was embedded in me theologically of what I believed. And so I think, if you know me well enough, I'm not afraid to tackle big questions and wrestle with stuff. And I don't have to claim to know everything, you know. And so that's why I think this message series is really, really important. Our message today is, we read it this morning, Pam read it for us in Genesis 2. And so let me ask you a question. Last week we read Genesis 1. This week we read Genesis 2. Two different creation stories. Why is that? Why is there two different creation stories back to back in chapters? Both say something different. Why is that? I'm not going to really get into that. I'm not going to answer that question for you, but I encourage you to research that, because I want to push you as a kingdom community to think, discover, research, uncover, discover, discard, whatever you got to do to help your theological foundation. And so Google that. Why is there two Genesis stories? You'll see a lot of different interpretations on that. But just to wrestle with that a little bit, I think it's important. And I'll throw some more Genesis stuff at you at the end that will throw a wrench in your spokes and challenge you even more. And it's important to do that, as we lifted up last week. Doubt is not separate from faith. It's part of it. And so we all have doubts. Every person on the planet has doubts about a lot of things, whether it's science, whether it's theology. It's just common to have these things go on. So let's bring them out of the dark places they're in. Let's bring them to the surface. Let's kick them around. Let's learn from each other. And I can promise you, after this series is over, when you reflect back on it, the content alone will help your faith journey in a big, big way. Today we're going to explore the origins of the universe. How did we get here? I mean, it's a fair question. It's been debated for years, theologically and in science. Immanuel Kant, one of the world's greatest philosophers, wrote this. He said, two things, I think that's a slide too, Peggy. Two things fill me with constantly increasing admiration and awe. The longer and more earnestly I reflect on them, the starry heavens without the moral law within. And so he wrestles with what we talked about week one, of this moral law, this natural, ingrained part of us, call it spirit, whatever you may, that knows right from wrong, you know. And so he wrestles with that when he looks at all of everything in creation. And he wrestles with that idea of how can this be and how does moral law fit into that? And the mystery of the universe and God have been a subject for debate for humans as far back as we can go. Humanity has challenged these things. So science is committed to addressing life's big questions. And they do this by addressing the data and mystery by creating a hypothesis, which means they conduct experiments, and then they test the hypothesis. Maybe you took science, maybe you took biology and chemistry, but hypothesis means a supposition of proposed explanation based on limited evidence as a starting point for the investigation. And most experiments on the cutting edge of science, they fail, and most hypotheses turn out to be wrong. But yet that doesn't keep them from trying. So it's something that they don't see a lot of progress in, but it's how they do it. One of the most cherished hopes of a scientist is that they make an observation that shakes up the field of research. And you see these are big news items on a regular basis when science finds another advancement in whether it's cancer research or heart disease or addiction, etc. And just a quote that Dr. Collins lifts up, he says, today's harmony is tomorrow's discord, because about the time you figure something out, something long comes along behind it, either to disprove it or to challenge it or make it incomplete. So in the 16th and 17th centuries, we had some great people, some great minds, people like Kepler, people like Galileo, all strong believers in God. All these guys believed in God. But an increasingly and compelling case, this is what Collins says, that the planet's movements could be adequately understood only if the Earth revolved around the sun, rather than the other way around. The conclusion details were not quite correct, and Galileo, as he says, made a famous blooper on his explanation of the tides that we would recognize in the ocean. And so when that happened, the Catholic Church, this is back in the 16th, 17th century, but the Catholic Church was strongly opposed to that, however claiming that this view was incompatible with Holy Scripture. So we talked back in the fall when we had that message series on finding God in popular culture. I talked about the concept of certainty and how we all get stuck. It's easy to get stuck in it. And when we put God in this box of certainty, that we're sure God is this way. We interpret Scripture, it's this way, it's the only way it could be, and we're so certain of it. And when anything comes along, whether it's a different theological argument or it's science that presses against that, it causes a lot of discomfort. And it's easy to want to argue it And that's what the church did. They pushed back on it, saying this is not possible. And it took them a long time before they finally took God out of that box a little bit and then moved a little bit in this argument that's being pressed against them. This is Collins, and I quote, "Most of the master revisions in science, quantum mechanics example, and our understanding of the material universe have come about with relatively narrow circles of academic investigation have remained largely out of the view of the general public." And what does that mean? It's that this stuff is so complex and so out there that your average Joe and Charlie isn't even going to be able to understand it if you gave it to them anyway. And they're probably not really going to care. They just want to know the big picture. There was a famous physicist named Ernest Rutherford that said this, and he commented on this 100 years ago, and he said this, and I quote, "A theory that you can't explain to the bartender is probably no darn good." And I'm cleaning that up a little bit. And so I like that. I mean, I think that's true. Stephen Hawking, that's the name you probably heard. Stephen Hawking, in his work, he wrote a book called A Brief History of Time, referring to a hoped-for time when an elegant, unified theory of everything is developed. So he's just hoping that we can have this unanimous decision about creation in the world. And listen to what he says. And then Collins says this, not generally give to the metaphysical musings. He says this, and I quote, this is Hawking's. It says, "Then we shall all, philosophers, scientists, and just ordinary people, be able to take part in a discussion of the question of why is it that we in the universe exist. And if we find the answer to that, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason. For then we would know the mind of God." Now think about that. Who else wanted to know the mind of God? Remember that? The story of Adam and Eve? Don't eat from the tree of knowledge. You can eat from all this other stuff, but whatever you do, don't eat from this tree. And then what happens? Satan comes along, the serpent comes along, however you want to interpret the story, and misleads them, feeds them a lie. They swallow it, hook, line, and sinker. And immediately, once they did, they realized they were naked, they were ashamed, they're trying to cover themselves. My mic died. But look what I got. Ha, ha, ha. But Adam and Eve come along, and like I said, they were misled, and it caused the fall of humanity. So Hawking, wanting to know the mind of God, is a pretty scary proposition, because we couldn't even handle it, and that was what God was trying to say. You can't handle it. Even if you did, you couldn't handle that truth if it bit you, and here you are trying to pursue it, and that's not a wise thing to do. And so, but yet science still tries to do just that. There we go. Science still tries to do just that. Thank you, Dale. And it's a scary proposition that we get into when we do that. And it could be a dream, I guess, but I don't think we would be able to handle the truth. As they said in The Officer and the Gentleman, you just won't be able to handle the truth, if it was given to you. Are these mathematical descriptions of reality signposts that point to something greater? I think yes. I think it's the easiest way to say it. It's just God's fingerprints is on everything. If we really wrestle with that, if we really think about that. Indeed, mathematics has led scientists right to the doorstep of some of the most profound questions of all. And first among them is, how did it all begin? That's the big $1 million question. How did we get here? And so we're going to talk about the Big Bang Theory. And we're not talking about the TV show, but maybe some of you watched that show. You may have even been a big fan of that. There, see some hands going up, and Sheldon and all that. And the lady that started that, Maya, I think is her name, she spun off and started a show called Cat that Susie and I watch on Sunday nights. So we get a kick out of that. But so we're not talking about that Big Bang. We're talking about this theory that at the beginning of the 20th century, that most scientists assumed a universe with no beginning and no end. That's not very long ago. That was the mindset. As kingdom people, we would argue that the universe definitely had a beginning. Amen. We read it the last few weeks. And then that as kingdom people, not that there will be an end, but there'll be a restoration of creation where the kingdom gets brought down from heaven and restored here on earth. All people, all humanity, all creation. So we would push back on that argument that science tries to present itself. Over time, scientists like Einstein and Hubble used the latest theories to determine that the light in the galaxy suggested that we were receding from our everywhere they looked. The farther away they were, the faster the galaxies were receding. Receding is this. See this here? This is called receding. This is the receding hairline. Some of you will be with me in heaven looking for the hair angel when we get there. You know, something of that. But that's receding. That everything is pulling away from the earth. That everything is as far as they can see, and the further away it is, the quicker it's happening. And so the vast majority of physicists and cosmologists concluded that the universe began a single moment, commonly referred to as the Big Bang. And calculations suggest that it happened approximately 14 billion years ago. In the 60s, by accident, a gentleman named Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson detected microwave signals from the universe, and it was annoying, I guess, to their research. But they finally discovered is that this noise was coming from the universe itself, and it was a result of the annihilation of matter and antimatter in the early moments of the exploding universe. So it validated what they already believed, this experiment and this research. And I quote, and this is what Collins had to say. He says, "A current unanswered question is whether the Big Bang has resulted in a universe that will go on expanding forever, or whether at some point gravitation will take over and the galaxies will begin to pull back together, ultimately resulting in a big crunch." So the evidence at that moment predicts, but he says the evidence at the moment predicts a slow fade rather than a dramatic collapse. So this is where science is at today. This is what they're thinking about. But really begs the question, more important than the Big Bang, because I have people press me on the Big Bang. I've had many debates about it. What do you think about the Big Bang? I said, I don't have any problem with the Big Bang. The only difference between you and I is I think somebody pulled the trigger, right? Somebody lit a fuse. So what do you say about that? Well, they don't have an answer to that. And it leads to this next question, is what came before the Big Bang? And it begs the question, what came before and who or what is responsible for it? And it certainly demonstrates the limits of science, and no other phenomenon does. And the consequences of the Big Bang theory for theology are profound. For faith, there is traditions that describe the universe having been created by God from nothingness. This is an electrifying outcome. Does such an astonishing event as the Big Bang theory fit in the definition of a miracle? And I would say absolutely. God's fingerprints are all over that. For me, that's a no-brainer. But this is what a famous astrophysicist named Robert Jastrow wrote this in a paragraph in his book called In Gods and Astronomers and the Astronomers. And this is what he quotes. And I love this quote. I'm going to give you two of them. But listen to what he says here. And I think we got it in the slide. At this moment, it seems as though science will never be able to raise the curtain on the mystery of creation. For the scientist who has lived by faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. Amen? And I think that's just awesome. That at the end of the day, you exhaust and do all this work, you're only going to discover what's been told to you from the beginning. For those looking to bring theologians and scientists together, and this is Collins talking, there is a much in the recent discoveries of the origin of the universe to inspire a mutual appreciation, one that you can appreciate science, but you can also appreciate theology. Elsewhere in his provocative book, Jastrow wrote this, and I quote, I think there's a slide for this, yeah. Now we see how the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The details, but essential elements in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis are the same. The chain of events leading to humanity commenced suddenly and sharply at a definite moment in time in a flash of light and energy. End quote. That's powerful when you think about here's this intelligent mind who's looked at this stuff as hard as you can look at it, and this is his conclusion. This is his observation. There's no doubt that the Big Bang cries out for a divine explanation. But again, I think that explanation is, to keep it simple, is somebody pulled the trigger. Somebody lit a fuse. And I think that's all we really need to wrestle with, that part of it. But what about the rest of creation? This is the second part of this question. How do we make sense of the long, drawn-out process by which our planet Earth came into existence? by scientific estimations, 10 billion years after the Big Bang. That's a long time. That's a long time. And so this next section is, I'm going to look at, it's called the formation of our solar system. And Collins would write, for the first million years after the Big Bang, the universe expanded and the Mother Earth started to form. And I love this because it just ties right into Genesis. You're going to love this here. It says, all the steps in forming our solar system are now well described and unlikely to be revised based on any additional future information, because they're all pretty much in agreement what they're talking about here. And it says, nearly all the atoms in your body were once cooked in a nuclear furnace of an ancient supernova. You and I are truly made of stardust. Of stardust. And what did God make humanity out of? Dust. And what did he say? You will return to the ground as dust. And it just fits right like a glove to that argument that's been there all along. Are there theological implications to any of these discoveries? How rare are we? How unlikely? A famous equation proposed by radio astronomer Frank Drake in 1961 allowed considerations for probabilities. But Drake's formula is interesting, but it found out to be practically useless. Again, it got defeated by new information. So much has been written about the potential theological significance of the discovery of planets, life on other planets, should that happen to pass. And so Collins raises the great question, would discovering life on another planet automatically render humankind on planet Earth any less special? So if we did discover E.T., or aliens, or whatever you want to talk about, your idea of extraterrestrial life. If we did discover life somewhere else, would that take away from your human experience? That's what he's asking. He goes on to say, would the existence of life on other planets make Creator God involved in that process less likely? And he goes on to say, in my view, such conclusions do not seem warranted. It's doubtful that any of us will learn the answers to life's tough questions in this lifetime. And so he's basically saying it wouldn't change anything for him. And so this next slide, this anthropic principle that we're going to talk about, which says, which is looking at that we exist in this universe, and therefore the universe exists in a way that allows observers to come into existence. So this is the principle, and it's broken down in 3 slides. So this is our 3 categories. So you can pick which one that syncs with you. But then in the scientific world, in the skeptic's mind, these are the 3 probabilities. Number 1, there are multiple universes. Life on Earth is a unique product of trial and error. That theory is called the multiverse hypothesis. Number 2, there's only one universe, and this is it, and we're just lucky it worked out. Everything just came together. You just have to be a human being. You got lucky. You got to live the human experience, but after you're gone, well, you're never going to wake up again. It's just over with. As Mark Twain once said, I was asleep billions of years before I woke up, And so it's that mindset. And then number 3, similar to number 2, there is only one universe, and this is it. The elements that came into being with the precise tuning is not an accident, but reflects the action of the one who created the universe in the first place. Amen. And that would be my vote. Door number 3, please. That's what I'm choosing. I don't know about you. Another distinguished physicist, Freeman Dyson, after reviewing the series of numeric accidents, concludes this, and I love it, and it's on the quote screen there. The more I examine the universe and the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe, in some sense, must have been known that we were coming. It's like, hey, hello, we've been here all along, but welcome. We're glad you're here. Glad you're part of the show. And Arno Piazza, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist who I lifted up earlier, provided strong support for the Big Bang. He states this, and I love this. I absolutely love this. He said, the best data we have are actually what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. Out of all the stuff we compiled, all the research we come up with, all the telescopes and everything has led me no more to a conclusion than I would have been if you just gave me the Bible and let me pick my own predictions based on that. This last piece that we're sliding into, this quantum mechanics of the uncertainty principle. Isaac Newton, you've all heard that name. A believer who wrote more about biblical interpretation than mathematics and physics. But not all those who followed him shared his faith. But at the beginning of the 19th century, there was a Frenchman named Marquis de Laplace. That's my little savoir-faire everywhere type accent. He was a distinguished French mathematician and a physicist, put forth a point of view that the nature and the governed by a precise set of physical laws, some discovered, some not yet discovered, and nature and therefore unable to avoid adhering to those laws. This theory represented an extreme form of scientific, what they would call determinism, obviously leaving no place for God except at the beginning, or the concept of free will. His view created quite a stir in the scientific world, but also in theological communities. And when he was asked by Napoleon asked Laplace, they asked him directly when he was asked about God, and Laplace responded with, and I quote, "I have no need of that hypothesis," end quote. He was already convinced that there was rules of the game. So basically the bottom line is his whole argument, his whole thesis on determinism was overturned pretty quick, and not by theological arguments, but by scientific ones. So it's what I'm saying, it's this constant thing. So as we go through the last couple of centuries and you study this stuff, it just leads me to the conclusion that no matter what they discover next, it's just going to point to what's already been pointed to all along. And so we can hang on that. Psalm 19:1, we got a slide for that. And it says, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork." And I don't think it needs to be said any better than that. The scientific worldview is not entirely sufficient to answer all the interesting questions about the origin of the world, of the universe. There's nothing inherently in the conflict between the idea of a creator and what science has revealed. I don't think there's any conflict at all. And so if you've wrestled with that in your journey, I don't think you have to any longer. The God hypothesis solves some profoundly troubling questions about what came before the Big Bang and why the universe seems to be so exquisitely tuned for us to be here. I mean, everything's just perfect. If it was just off a little bit here, we'd freeze to death. If it was a little bit over here, we'd burn to death. I mean, everything is just tuned. It's fine-tuned as John's bass guitar. You know, it's that tuned. It doesn't get any cleaner than that, right? And for the theist who is led from the moral argument, which we talked about in chapter 1, to seek God who not only set the universe in motion, but takes an interest in human beings, you and I, such a synthesis can be readily achieved. The argument would go like this, and I absolutely love what Collins did here. This is Collins' argument for the God hypothesis. So I think I got it broke down in slides. So this is what he says, and listen to this. If God exists, then God is supernatural. And if God is supernatural, then God is not limited by natural laws. And if natural laws do not limit God, there is no reason God should be limited by time. If God is not limited by time, then God is past, he's present, and he's future. So the consequences of these conclusions would include the following. So this would be the conclusions of this. God could exist before the Big Bang, and God could exist after the universe fades away, if it ever does. God could know the precise outcome of the formation of the universe even before it started. God could have foreknowledged of a planet near the outer rim of an average spiral galaxy that would have just the right characteristics to allow life. God could have foreknowledged that a planet would lead to the development of sentient creatures through the mechanism of evolution by natural selection. God could have known in advance the creature's thoughts and actions, even though they had free will. And he goes on to say that I have much more to say about this in later chapters, but the outlines, and I agree with him, has a satisfying harmony between science and belief that we can now hang on to and that we can now see. And I love how he's bringing it about in his book. Deists like Einstein, who view God as having started the whole process and then basically going on vacation. Here you go, guys. I'll see you later. Good luck with that. Don't burn it to the ground too fast. There's some deists out there that think that way. They believe in God, but they don't believe he's active anymore. He's out of here a long time ago. The kingdom worldview, the opening of Genesis, says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, which is entirely compatible with the Big Bang. And so this is where you might get pressed with some of your embedded theology, if you haven't. It's that not all Christian interpretations have been supportive of the scientific worldview. Mine wasn't when I was growing up. Those who interpret Genesis in absolute, in literal terms, conclude the earth is only about 6,000 years old and therefore reject most of the conclusions cited. So is the earth 6,000 years old, or is it 5 billion years old? Or do you even care? I mean, but there's people get stuck here. This is where I was stuck early on in my life, that I was just trained, I was taught that the Bible is literally, you take every word exactly how it is, and this is how it is. And the minute anybody pressed that, especially science, especially evolution, I just watered up my faith and threw it in the trash because it just didn't make any sense to me. And so today I can just tell you I'm not a literalist when it comes to this part of creation. And I don't care how old the earth is, to be honest with you. What I do care about is Jesus, right? Amen? I do care that there is a loving God that created this world, this universe, and he created us as human beings for a purpose. And that is his internal purpose, not ours, but his purpose. And our calling is to lead it into that purpose. And what is that purpose? Well, Jesus made it pretty simple. To love God and to love your neighbor. That's the purpose. That's how you're supposed to live your life. It's the best way you can live your life as a kingdom person. It's just to love other people and love God. But you can't do that if you don't have God inside you. It's impossible. You might think you're pulling it off, but I can promise you can never love another human being. You can never love and stand for justice, righteousness, and shalom in the lives of other people without the love of God being inside you. It's impossible. And so that's what I believe. And I don't get caught up. I know when the thief was on the cross and was crucified right next to Jesus, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, Lord, can I go with you? Can I be with you wherever you're going? And he turned to him and he said, you'll be with me in paradise. He didn't say, do you know how old the earth is? Right? Was you baptized? Have you confessed my name in front of everybody else? He just said, you'll be with me in paradise. And so that's might seem like a watered down version of faith, but that's really where I'm at. But there was a time when this really hung me up. And if you're one of those people, I don't care if you're a literalist or you're a non-literalist. I don't really care. I don't know how old the earth is, but I just don't care. But I do believe in God, and I do believe in Jesus, and I do believe in the cross, and I believe everything it stands for. And that's what I put my faith and trust in today, and that's what I live into. The biblical texts that describe historical events should be interpreted as allegory only if strong evidence requires it. So this question is, does Genesis belong in this category? And that debate continues today between literalist and non-literalist. Excuse me. Is Genesis strict? Is it absolute? Or are the 5 books of the Pentateuch, are they for real? Is that exactly how it happened? To the time. A day was a day. And this is exactly how it happened. And the earth is only 6,000 years old. Or is that allegory? Is it really not to be a literal historical book, but is it trying to just tell us about the character of God and how this all came into being? So you may be thinking, well, is Genesis the oldest, is the book, the Bible, is it the oldest book that there is? And the reality of it is, no. There's other books out there that are older than Genesis. They're older than the Bible. And for a lot of people, that's like a revelation. What? I always thought the Bible was the oldest piece of literature. No, there's probably about 10 recorded books that they know for sure are older than the Bible. And many of those have flood stories, and many of those have creation stories in them. So what do you do with that? But it's just not uncommon in East Asian culture at that time that the way the world worked, the way you communicated, is the way we really do today, is you tell stories. And you might use allegories, you might use metaphors like we do still today. How did Jesus teach? He taught in parables. You ask him a question, he'd give you a parable back. He would tell you a story. And so you can wrestle with all those things, but the skeptics, atheists, agnostics that are just sold out, that say that it's all garbage, it's a fairy tale, might as well read Alice in Wonderland. So if you get lost in those conversations, do a little bit of research on this stuff. Be a little bit educated about that. Know what that is. There's sects of Judaism, especially Reform Judaism, that don't even believe the first 5 books of the Bible actually were, actually historically happened. That there wasn't even really a Moses, and there really wasn't anything, and that the Bible really didn't get real until you got to King David, and then that's when the Bible started. There's that sect of Judaism. So there's all kinds of thinking and theories and debates on all this stuff that we're talking about. And so if you know about that, and you can do some research, and you can wrestle with some of these things, it'll do wonders for your faith, because you're going to get in a conversation, you're going to press up against somebody who's going to go, I can't believe you buy into all that stuff. you know. But if you have some background in that, you can easily work through that and wrestle with those things. And so that's what I challenge you to do in your walk, in your kingdom walk, is don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to have doubts about things. Don't be afraid to bring them out of the dark into the light and go, hey, what about this? Can we talk about this? Because this, after I discovered this, really messes me up. Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's kick the tires on that. That's how your faith's going to grow. It's how my faith has grown. And it's really, really important. So I want to invite the band back up as we're going to get ready and go to a time of communion. And I want to leave you with a quote about what I'm talking about don't get hung up on the details. And this comes from St. Augustine. It's one of the greatest theologians and scholars in history. And this is what he says. And listen to what he says. And he's talking about what we're talking about here. And listen to what he says. The matters that are so obscure and far behind our vision, we find in Holy Scripture passages which can be interpreted in a variety or very different ways without prejudice to the faith we have received. In such cases, we should not rush into headlong and so firmly take our stand on that side of it. If further progress in the search for truth justly undermines the position, we too fall with it. End quote. So what is he saying? What he's saying is if you're locked into this box of certainty, that the earth's only 6,000 years old or what have it be, and enough evidence comes forward that you're going to fall with that position. Your faith is going to crumble and you're going to fall with it. And so we don't have to do that today. And not everything goes into allegory, especially when you start talking about teachings of Jesus and all that stuff. And we'll talk about those at later dates. But when it comes to this part of it, the creation story, there's lots of different theories out there. But what I have no doubt about is that God created it all. No question about it. His fingerprints are all over it. Your DNA is so powerful. It's just a language and a code for God. Even two identical twins who have the same DNA will have different fingerprints. They'll have different ear prints. They'll have different tongue prints. Go on down the line. Forehead prints. I mean, there's like 20 different prints you have on your body that nobody's had before you and nobody will ever have after you. And so if you need a physical presence, you need some kind of evidence that you can hang on to that this is really from above. Hang on to that. How do you explain that? If you need a spiritual birthmark, if you need a VIN number, that you were created for a purpose, that's it, friends. And what is that? It's God's eternal purpose, and it's for us to live into that. And when we do that, it'll change our life. Amen? Amen. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this time today. We thank you for this hard subject, this hard message. And how do you even put a message around it? How do you even bring this to light in a sermon or a message? But we can't shy away from the big issues in life. We have to just face them and trust that the Holy Spirit will empower us to understand it to a level that we can comprehend, and no more and no less. And so we just pray for the knowledge to learn what we need to learn. Set aside any old ideas that hang us up and just lean into that eternal purpose, that purpose that you created all humanity for. Help us to live into that with our entire being. Help us to just live into your commandment, to love you and to love our neighbor, and do it with every zest of zeal we have in our lives, in our DNA. Just help us do that. Help us to be divorced from this world and just live into this kingdom calling. Hi again, this is Harold. Thanks for listening to our weekly message and podcast. I hope that we have shared something helpful to you wherever you are in your spiritual journey. Just so you know a little bit more about us, we are Hill-Tran United. Hill-Tran United is an alliance between Hillsboro United Methodist Church and Transformation United Methodist Church. We are kingdom churches and kingdom communities for people who aren't into church. We meet Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. at Hillsboro United Methodist Church and 11 a.m. at Transformation United Methodist Church. Both churches are located in the northeastern tip of the beautiful Ozark Mountains, located in Jefferson County, Missouri. We also meet during the week in smaller groups that we call life groups and home churches, and that's how we make it relational. We hear regularly from people from all over who are engaging in personal and group studies based on our teaching, and we would love to know if that is happening where you are at. If you want to connect with us, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Vimeo, and YouTube, or you can download our app from your favorite app store. Just search for the app titled Our Church by Church Dev and enter in Hill-Tran United, and you can access all of our available audio, video teachings, plus through the app,
or our website, you can download our PowerPoint slides, bulletin, sermon notes, and discussion questions. It's all there for you. And lastly, if you want to learn more about how you can support Hillsboro United Methodist Church or Transformation United Methodist Church financially, please go to www.hilltran.org for more information and to give. We appreciate anything you can do to help. Hey, thanks for being a member of this extended church family. I'm glad we are in this together as kingdom people, commencing shoulder to shoulder to help people rediscover life and experience the kingdom of God.